in a quiet, mystical village nestled between ancient forests, where the air always carries the faint scent of pine and the whispers of forgotten tales. A curious librarian named Elara spends her days surrounded by dusty tomes and fading stories. One evening, as the golden light of sunset filters through the weathered windows of her library, she stumbles upon a book unlike any other. Its cover is worn, its edges cracked, and yet it seems to hum faintly, as if alive. The title, The Enigma of the Timekeepers, glimmers faintly in the dim light. With a mix of trepidation and intrigue, Elara opens it, and the air around her shifts. A soft, resonating hum fills the room, wrapping her in a warmth that feels both comforting and unsettling. The pages seem to come alive, their words shimmering as they beckon her deeper into a world where time is not just a concept, but a living, breathing force. As Elara reads, she feels the weight of centuries pressing against her, and the whispers of long-lost secrets brush against her thoughts. She is captivated, drawn into a mystery that feels both ancient and urgent. Yet, beneath the allure of discovery, she senses something else, something darker, a tension, a presence, as if the book itself is a doorway to forces that should have stayed buried. What secrets does it hold? What power is stirring in the shadows? And why does it feel as though time itself is watching her, waiting for her to uncover its enigma? Where are you joining us from, and what time is it there? As Elara's journey begins, let's step into this world together, where every moment holds a story, and every story holds a key to the mysteries of time. Elara's fingers trace the ancient pages of the tome, the rough texture of the parchment, grounding her in the reality of her quest. The symbols etched into the paper seem to shift under her gaze, as if alive, each one a puzzle waiting to be solved. She had always been drawn to mysteries, but this was unlike anything she'd encountered before. The deeper she read, the clearer it became. This was no ordinary book. It spoke of the Timekeepers, enigmatic beings who had once stood as guardians over the very fabric of time itself. Their role was to ensure balance, to prevent the past, present, and future from colliding in chaos. But something had happened. They were gone, and in their absence, the world had become vulnerable to strange and dangerous temporal rifts. As Elara turned another page, a chill ran down her spine. The whispers began softly, almost imperceptible at first, like the rustle of leaves in a distant forest. But soon they grew louder, filling the room with a haunting cadence. It was as if the voices of generations past and futures yet to come were converging around her, each one vying for her attention. The air felt heavier, charged with an energy she couldn't quite place. She paused, her heart racing, and listened. The whispers weren't random. They carried fragments of knowledge, names, places, warnings. One word seemed to echo louder than the rest: awakening. Her mind raced with questions. What had happened to the Timekeepers? And why, after all this time, were these whispers reaching out to her? She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something far greater than herself. The tome held answers, but they were cloaked in riddles and veiled in secrecy. With each symbol she deciphered, she felt herself stepping closer to a truth that could change everything. But she also sensed the weight of it, the responsibility of uncovering something that had been hidden for centuries. The whispers grew more insistent, urging her forward. She knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Elara paused at the base of the old clock tower, its ancient gears creaking softly in the stillness of the village square. The air felt heavier here, as if time itself had gathered in this one place, waiting to be unraveled. Her fingers brushed against the cold stone, tracing the intricate carvings that told stories of a forgotten age. Something called to her, a faint hum, barely audible, yet impossible to ignore. She climbed the narrow spiral staircase, each step echoing in the hollow chamber, until she reached the heart of the tower. There, nestled among the rusted mechanisms, was a peculiar dial she hadn't noticed before. Its surface gleamed faintly, as though lit from within. Without thinking, she turned it, her curiosity overriding caution. The moment the dial clicked into place, the air around her seemed to shudder. A low, resonant tone filled the space, and before her eyes, a rift began to form, a jagged tear in the fabric of time. Colors swirled within it, fractured and chaotic, pulling her gaze into a moment that didn't belong to the present. Through the rift, she saw a shadowy figure moving swiftly, their cloak billowing as they clutched something tightly in their hand. It was an artifact, its surface etched with symbols that matched the carvings on the tower walls. Elara's heart raced as she realized what she was witnessing. A theft, centuries old, of the key to the Timekeepers' sanctuary. The figure vanished into the haze of the rift, leaving her staring into the fractured past. But the rift was unstable, its edges flickering and crackling with energy. The air grew hotter, the hum louder, and the tower itself seemed to groan under the strain. Elara's instincts screamed at her to flee, to escape before the rift collapsed and took her with it. Yet the artifact was within reach, a piece of the puzzle she had been searching for, a way to uncover the truth about the Timekeepers. She stood at the edge, her breath shallow, her mind racing. To step into the rift was to risk everything: her safety, her very existence. But to turn away now would mean losing the key, and with it, the chance to restore what had been broken. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, as heavy as the ancient stones around her. Time itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her choice. Elara hesitated for only a moment, her breath catching in her throat as the rift pulsed before her. The air around it seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy, pulling her forward despite the unease coiled in her chest. Ignoring the gnawing fear, she took a decisive step through, and the world around her shifted in an instant. The village she knew so well was now a jagged mosaic of the past, buildings and pathways fractured as though time itself had been shattered. The familiar cobblestones beneath her feet felt alien, the air thick with the scent of centuries gone by. Her heart raced, but she steadied herself, focusing on the faint whispers that seemed to thread through the chaos. They were soft, almost melodic, urging her onward. A shadow moved at the edge of her vision, and a voice, cold and mocking, cut through the silence. "You're too late, Elara," it sneered. "The artifact is already beyond your grasp." The shadowy figure loomed, a silhouette that seemed to twist and writhe as though made of smoke. Elara clenched her fists, her determination flaring brighter than her fear. She wasn't just chasing a thief anymore. The realization struck her with the force of a tidal wave. She was racing against time itself. Every second she hesitated, every wrong turn brought her closer to losing what she'd come to reclaim. The whispers grew louder, guiding her through the fragmented landscape, but the path ahead was anything but clear. Elara pressed on, her resolve unshaken. The shadow might taunt her, the world might crumble around her, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't afford to fail. The artifact was more than an object. It was a key to something far greater, and she was the only one who could restore it. The clock was ticking, and Elara was determined to beat it. As Elara stepped back into the familiar cobblestone streets of her village, the weight of what she had witnessed at the rift lingered in her mind like a shadow. The air felt thick with secrets, and she knew there was only one person who might hold the answers she sought. With a determined stride, she made her way to the Elder's cottage, a humble dwelling nestled beneath the whispering branches of an ancient oak tree. The Elder, her face lined with years of wisdom and sorrow, welcomed Elara with a knowing gaze. "You've seen the rift," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of ages. Elara nodded, her heart pounding as she recounted the shadowy figure and the stolen artifact. The Elder's eyes darkened, and she leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Timekeepers were not destroyed by chance," she began. "They were betrayed. One of their own turned against them, driven by greed and the desire to control time itself." Elara's breath caught in her throat. "The artifact, what was it?" she asked, her voice trembling. The Elder's expression grew grave. "The Kronos key," she replied. "A relic of immense power, capable of unlocking the Timekeeper's sanctuary. Whoever possesses it can manipulate the flow of time, bending it to their will." As the Elder's words settled in her mind, Elara's thoughts raced. The shadowy figure she had encountered. Could they be the betrayer? Someone who had once been trusted by the Timekeepers, now twisted by their own ambitions. The pieces began to fall into place, and a chill ran down her spine. If the Kronos key fell into the wrong hands, it could unravel the very fabric of time, plunging the world into chaos. With a newfound resolve, Elara thanked the Elder and stepped back into the fading light of the village. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: she had to find the Kronos key before it was too late. The shadows of the past were closing in, and the fate of the Timekeepers, and perhaps all of existence, rested in her hands. As Elara tightened the straps of her satchel, the weight of her mission pressed heavily on her shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, and the shadows of the forest seemed to stretch endlessly. Just as she took her first step forward, the sound of a lute strumming softly caught her attention. From the edge of the path emerged a figure cloaked in mismatched fabrics, his fingers dancing over the strings with an air of practiced ease. This was Kale, a wandering bard whose eyes sparkled with mischief and mystery. He introduced himself with a flourish, spinning tales of distant lands and ancient ruins. "The sanctuary of the Timekeepers," he said, leaning in as though sharing a secret, "isn't marked on any map. But I've heard whispers of its location from those who have walked the edges of time itself." His words were captivating, but something about them felt off. The details in his stories shifted like sand, one moment placing the sanctuary in a forgotten valley, the next atop a mountain kissed by eternal snow. Elara's instincts warred within her. Kale's charm was undeniable, his knowledge tantalizingly close to the answers she sought. Yet, the inconsistencies in his tales made her wary. Could she afford to trust someone whose truths seemed as fleeting as the wind? On the other hand, going it alone meant navigating a labyrinth of unknowns without guidance. The choice weighed on her, each path fraught with its own risks. Kale, sensing her hesitation, offered her a small smile. "Sometimes," he said, his voice softening, "the greatest journeys are made with unexpected companions. I may not have all the answers, but I know enough to point you in the right direction." His words lingered in the air, a subtle invitation that tugged at Elara's resolve. As she stood there, the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her decision. To trust Kale was to embrace the unknown, to gamble on the possibility of hastened success. But to walk alone was to cling to the familiar, even if it meant a longer, more arduous path. The stakes were high, and time, as always, was slipping away. The whispering forest unfolded before Elara and Kale like a living enigma, its towering trees swaying as if guided by some unseen force. Time here was a fickle companion, bending and twisting in ways that defied logic. One moment, the sun hung high in the sky, casting golden rays through the canopy. The next, shadows stretched long and cold, as though twilight had arrived without warning. The ground beneath their feet shifted subtly, and the trees seemed to rearrange themselves when they weren't looking, leaving them disoriented yet strangely captivated. A low hum filled the air, a chorus of whispers that carried fragments of voices from ages past, fragments of laughter, cries of sorrow, and the faint rustle of ancient memories seemed to cling to every leaf and branch. It was as if the forest itself was a keeper of time, holding on to moments long forgotten by the world outside. Elara paused, her fingers brushing against the bark of an ancient oak. She could almost feel the pulse of history beneath her touch, a reminder of the immense task that lay ahead. As they ventured deeper, a faint glow caught their attention. It emanated from a clearing where a spirit, bound by threads of shimmering light, hovered above the ground. Its form was ethereal, flickering like a candle flame in the wind, and its voice carried a weight that made the air seem heavier. "Beware," it murmured, its tone both urgent and mournful. "The betrayer's power grows with every shadow he claims. He seeks to unravel the threads of time itself, and if he succeeds, all will be lost." Elara's heart clenched at the spirit's words. The enormity of her role as a timekeeper pressed down on her shoulders like a boulder. She glanced at Kale, whose steady gaze offered silent reassurance, but doubts crept in nonetheless. Could she truly stand against such a force? Was she strong enough to protect not just the present, but the past and future as well? The spirit's warning lingered in her mind, a haunting echo that refused to fade. Yet, even as uncertainty gnawed at her, a spark of determination flickered within her. The forest's whispers seemed to grow louder, as if urging her forward. Each step she took felt like a defiance of the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. The path ahead was shrouded in mystery, and the challenges would be greater than anything she'd faced before. But with Kale by her side, and the legacy of the Timekeepers at her back, she knew she couldn't turn away. The whispering forest had revealed its secrets, and now it was her turn to answer the call. Deep within the heart of the forest, where the sunlight struggled to pierce the thick canopy above, Kale and Elara stumbled upon something unexpected, a hidden temple, its ancient stone walls half consumed by moss and vines. The air grew heavy with an eerie stillness, as if the very forest held its breath. As they stepped inside, the faint click of a mechanism beneath Kale's foot sent a chill down their spines. The temple wasn't just ancient, it was a labyrinth of dangers, every step a potential trigger for disaster. Kale's reflexes were razor sharp. He yanked Elara back just as a slew of arrows whizzed past, embedding themselves into the wall where she'd stood moments before. His movements were precise, almost instinctive, as he navigated the traps with uncanny ease. He disarmed pressure plates, sidestepped hidden pitfalls, and even deciphered cryptic symbols etched into the floor. Elara watched in silence, her curiosity growing with every passing moment. When they finally reached a safe chamber, Elara turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "How did you know all that?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with suspicion. "The way you moved, it's like you've been here before." Kale hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground. After a long pause, he sighed. "I haven't been here, but my ancestors have. I'm descended from the betrayer's bloodline, the one who first cursed this land." Elara's breath caught. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. The betrayer's name was whispered in legends, a figure synonymous with treachery and ruin. Yet here was Kael, standing before her, his honesty cutting through the tension. "I didn't choose this lineage," he continued, his voice firm, "but I've spent my life trying to undo what my ancestors did. I want to help you. I need to help you." Elara studied him, her thoughts swirling. Trust wasn't something she gave lightly, especially not to someone tied to such a dark past. But Kael had just saved her life, and his resolution seemed genuine. Could she look past his bloodline and see the man standing before her? The decision weighed on her, a crossroads that would shape the path ahead. The air around them crackled with an unnatural energy, the forest now a swirling vortex of disintegrating trees and fragmented light. This was no ordinary storm. It was a temporal storm, a chaotic force tearing at the very fabric of time. Elara could feel its pull, a cold, relentless tide threatening to unravel their existence. She glanced at Finn, his face pale but determined, and knew they had no choice but to face this head-on. With a deep breath, Elara focused her will, her connection to the Kronos key, humming faintly in her chest. She reached out with her mind, grasping at the threads of time that were unraveling around them. It was like trying to hold back an ocean with her bare hands, but she refused to let go. Slowly, painfully, she began to weave those threads back together, stabilizing the immediate area. The storm's fury lessened, but the effort left her gasping for air, her strength sapped. As she steadied herself, a chilling realization settled over her. This wasn't a natural phenomenon, it was deliberate. Someone was using the Kronos key to manipulate time on a scale she hadn't thought possible. The betrayer, whoever they were, wasn't just an enemy, they were a puppeteer, twisting the very flow of existence to their will. The stakes had just grown immeasurably higher. Finn placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. "We can't stop now," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Elara nodded, her resolve hardening. They were racing against an unseen adversary, one who wielded time itself as a weapon. But if the betrayer thought they could be erased so easily, they were sorely mistaken. As Elara and Kale stepped into the Clockwork City, the air hummed with the rhythmic ticking of countless gears. Around them, towering spires of brass and bronze rose into the sky, each adorned with spinning cogs and whirring pendulums. It was a place where time itself seemed to breathe, every second meticulously measured and controlled. Kale's voice broke the silence, low and urgent. "This city is the heart of time's flow," he explained, "but something's wrong. Can you feel it?" Elara nodded, her skin prickling with unease. The usual harmony of the city's mechanisms felt off kilter, as if the very fabric of time was being pulled apart. The streets were alive with motion, yet the inhabitants moved with a strange urgency. A woman in a clockwork-adorned cloak approached them, her eyes wide with warning. "You're too late," she whispered. "The betrayer has already begun to rewrite history. Every step they take unravels the threads of what was and what will be." Elara's heart sank. The stakes were higher than they'd imagined. If history was being altered, the consequences could ripple across all of existence. Kale's expression hardened. "We need to reach the Kronos vault," he said. "It's the only place where we can stop this madness." But the path ahead was anything but straightforward. The streets of the Clockwork City were a labyrinth, twisting and folding back on themselves in ways that defied logic. Time loops lurked around every corner, trapping the unwary in endless repetitions of the same moment. Distorted realities shimmered like mirages, tempting travelers with false promises of escape. Elara gripped her amulet tightly, its warmth a reminder of her resolve. "How do we navigate this?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Kale gestured to a series of glowing symbols etched into the cobblestones. "These are temporal markers," he explained. "They guide the flow of time in the city. If we follow the true path, we'll reach the vault, but one wrong step, and we could be lost forever." As they moved deeper into the city, the air grew heavier, the ticking of the clocks more insistent. Each step felt like a battle against the currents of time itself. They passed through streets where the past and future collided, ancient ruins crumbling into dust, while sleek, futuristic structures rose from the ground. The inhabitants watched them with a mix of fear and hope, their lives hanging in the balance as the betrayer's machinations threatened to erase everything they knew. Elara paused as they reached a crossroads, the markers flickering uncertainly. "Which way?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale hesitated, his gaze fixed on the shifting symbols. "Left," he said finally, "but we need to move quickly. The closer we get to the vault, the more the betrayer will try to stop us." Together, they pressed on, their determination unshaken even as the city's distortions grew more pronounced. The Kronos vault loomed ahead, its gates guarded by the echoes of forgotten eras. It was there that they would face their greatest challenge, and perhaps their only chance to restore the balance of time. As they stepped into the Kronos vault, the air grew heavy with the weight of centuries. Towering before them stood the guardian of the vault, a clockwork construct of shimmering brass and intricate gears. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its voice echoed like the ticking of 1,000 clocks. "To proceed, you must prove your understanding of time. it intoned, its words measured and deliberate. Elara's heart quickened as she stepped forward, her mind racing through the countless hours she'd spent studying the mysteries of time. The Guardian posed its first riddle, a puzzle woven with threads of history and philosophy. With calm precision, Elara unraveled its meaning, her voice steady as she delivered the answer. The construct's gears whirred in approval, but Kale shifted impatiently beside her. Time is just a measurement, not some grand mystery, he muttered under his breath, his foot tapping restlessly. When the Guardian turned to him with its next challenge, Kale tried to outsmart it with quick, clever answers. But the construct's gaze narrowed. Impatience is the enemy of understanding, it said, its voice cold and final. A ripple of energy surged, threatening to erase them from existence. Elara stepped in, her voice firm but calm. Patience is the fabric of time, she declared, her words halting the construct's advance. The Guardian paused, then nodded slowly, its gears settling back into a steady rhythm. As they moved deeper into the vault, Elara couldn't shake the realization that knowledge alone wasn't enough. Trust and patience were just as vital in this journey, qualities Kael would need to embrace if they were to succeed. She glanced at him, her confidence tempered by the weight of what lay ahead. The path forward was clear, but the choices they made would shape not only their fate, but the very flow of time itself. As the air grew heavy with tension, Elara and her companions stood face to face with the shadowy figure they had been pursuing. The figure let out a low, chilling laugh, his form solidifying into a man cloaked in dark robes. Malric, Elara whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of recognition and dread. Once a revered timekeeper, Malric had fallen from grace long ago, consumed by his obsession with controlling time itself. His eyes gleamed with a dangerous mix of arrogance and bitterness as he stepped forward. "You think you can change the course of time?" Malric sneered, his voice echoing like a distant storm. "Time bends to those who are bold enough to seize it, not to those who cling to its rules like fools." He raised his hand, and the air around them seemed to warp, as if the very fabric of time was bending to his will. Elara felt the weight of his words, but she refused to falter. Drawing on her deep understanding of time's delicate balance, Elara began to piece together a plan. She knew that Malric's strength lay in his ability to manipulate time's flow, but his arrogance could also be his downfall. "Time isn't a weapon to be wielded," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her heart. "It's a force to be respected, to be understood. You've forgotten that, and that's why you'll fail." Malric's laughter cut through the air like a blade, but Elara focused on the Kronos key, its faint glow pulsing in her hand. She remembered the lessons of the ancient texts, the wisdom of the timekeepers who came before her. Time wasn't just about control, it was about harmony, about the delicate interplay between past, present, and future. With that realization, she began to subtly shift the energy around her, creating ripples in the temporal field that Malric had so carefully constructed. The fallen timekeeper's confidence wavered as he sensed the disruption. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice laced with unease. Elara didn't respond. Instead, she focused on the Kronos key, channeling its power to unravel Malric's hold on time. The air crackled with energy, and for a moment, it seemed as if the world itself was holding its breath. Malric's once imposing figure began to flicker, his control slipping away. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice fading as the temporal rift closed around him. Elara stood firm, the Kronos key glowing brightly in her hand. She had outwitted Malric, at least for now, but she knew this was only the beginning. The fight to protect time's balance had just taken a dangerous turn, and the stakes had never been higher. As Elara and Kale stepped into the Timekeepers' sanctuary, the air around them seemed to shift, humming with an almost tangible energy. The walls shimmered faintly, as though they held fragments of countless moments, past, present, and future, all woven together in a delicate tapestry. Elara could feel the weight of the key in her hand, its intricate carvings now glowing softly, as if responding to the sanctuary's call. Kale glanced at her, his expression a mix of awe and curiosity. "Do you feel it too?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elara nodded, her breath catching in her throat. The energy here wasn't just surrounding her, it was within her, weaving itself into the very fabric of her being. The sanctuary's resonance seemed to amplify her connection to time, making it feel as though she could almost reach out and touch the threads of history and possibility that surrounded them. Her vision blurred for a moment, and then she heard them, voices, soft and ethereal, like a distant echo. At first, they were indistinguishable, a murmur of countless whispers overlapping. But gradually, they began to coalesce into words, urging her gently yet insistently. "Restore the balance," they seemed to say, their tones both commanding and comforting. Elara's heart quickened. She turned to Kael, who was watching her intently. "They're speaking to me," she said, her voice trembling with wonder. "The Timekeepers, they're guiding me." Kael's eyes widened, but he didn't interrupt. Instead, he gestured for her to follow the pull of the whispers. Together, they moved deeper into the sanctuary, the air growing thicker with every step. The walls seemed to ripple, as though they were alive, responding to Elara's presence. She could feel the Timekeepers' voices growing stronger, their words clearer now. They spoke of fractures in time, of moments unraveling, and of the delicate equilibrium that needed to be preserved. It was as if the sanctuary itself was a living entity, its energies intertwining with hers, guiding her towards something she couldn't yet fully understand. As they approached the heart of the sanctuary, a massive, ornate archway came into view. Beyond it, the air shimmered like a mirage, and Elara could see faint glimpses of other times, moments frozen in place, waiting to be set right. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "This is where it begins," she murmured, more to herself than to Kael. The key in her hand pulsed with light, as if it, too, understood the gravity of the moment. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The path ahead was uncertain, but the Timekeepers' voices gave her a sense of purpose. Restoring balance wasn't just a task, it was her destiny. And with Kale by her side, she felt ready to face whatever lay beyond the archway. As Elara stood before the ancient gateway, the air around her seemed to hum with an unspoken challenge. This was the moment she had been preparing for, though she hadn't anticipated the form it would take. The final test wasn't about solving riddles or battling external foes. It was a confrontation with herself. Shadows began to swirl, and suddenly, she was pulled into a whirlwind of memories. Moments she had buried deep within her mind resurfaced. The times she had doubted her abilities, the losses that had left her feeling hollow, the failures that had whispered she wasn't enough. Each memory struck like a blow, threatening to overwhelm her. Yet as she stood in the eye of this storm, she realized something profound. These fears, these doubts, they weren't here to break her. They were here to remind her of how far she had come. Kale's voice cut through the chaos, steady and reassuring. You've faced these before, Elara, and each time, you've risen. This is no different. His words anchored her, a lifeline in the tempest. She thought of the Timekeepers, of the delicate balance of time she had sworn to protect. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about something greater. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, not to escape the memories, but to embrace them. She acknowledged her fears, her failures, and in doing so, she found a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The shadows began to recede, the storm quieted, and Elara emerged not as the person she had been, but as the person she was meant to be. Her purpose was clear now, sharper than ever. Kale's presence beside her was a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone in this journey. Together, they had faced the impossible, and together, they would restore what had been lost. But this moment, this final test, was hers alone. It wasn't just about restoring the Timekeepers, it was about claiming her place among them. With newfound resolve, she turned to the gateway, ready to take the final step. The path ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. Elara was no longer defined by her doubts. She was defined by her courage, her determination, and the unshakable belief that she could make a difference. The Timekeepers awaited, and so did the future she was destined to shape. The air in the sanctuary grew heavy with anticipation as Elara stood at the center of the ancient chamber, the Kronos key glowing faintly in her hands. She closed her eyes, focusing on the pulsing rhythm of the sanctuary's energy, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to echo through her very bones. This was the moment she had prepared for, the culmination of her journey. With a steady breath, she began the ritual of restoration, each movement deliberate, each word of the incantation precise. The key in her hands flared brighter, a beacon of light that seemed to stretch toward the very fabric of time itself. Just as the ritual reached its peak, a shadow emerged from the corner of the chamber. Malric, his presence as cold and unyielding as ever, stepped into the light. "You think you can undo what's been done?" he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. Without warning, he lunged toward Elara, his intent clear: to destroy the key and thwart her efforts. But before he could reach her, Kale stepped into his path. Their blades clashed in a burst of sparks, and though Kale was no match for Malric's raw power, he fought with everything he had. "Go, Elara," he shouted, his voice strained but resolute. "Finish it." Tears streamed down Elara's face as she watched Kale fall, his body crumpling to the ground. Grief tore through her, sharp and unrelenting, but it wasn't enough to break her. Instead, it ignited a fire within her, a resolve so fierce, it seemed to amplify the sanctuary's energy. She turned back to the Kronos key, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. Drawing on every ounce of strength she had left, she completed the incantation. The key erupted in a blinding light, and the air itself seemed to tremble as the Timekeepers began to materialize their ethereal forms, shimmering into existence, their presence both awe-inspiring and humbling. For a moment, the sanctuary was utterly still, as if the world itself held its breath. Then, with a soft, resonant hum, the Timekeepers awakened, their eyes opening to a world they had not seen in eons. Elara stood before them, her heart pounding, her grief and triumph intertwined. The Timekeepers had returned, but the cost had been steep. Kale's sacrifice would not be forgotten. And as she looked into the eyes of the ancient guardians, she knew this was only the beginning. The balance of time had been restored, but the echoes of this moment would ripple far beyond the sanctuary's walls. The Timekeepers, their forms glowing faintly in the twilight, turned to Elara with a quiet reverence. "You have done what few could," one of them spoke, their voice like the soft chime of a distant bell. "Your courage has mended the fractures in time's flow, and for that, we are eternally grateful." Elara, still catching her breath, felt a warmth spread through her chest, not just from their words, but from the weight of what she'd accomplished. She had faced the shadow of chaos and emerged with time itself restored to its rightful course. One of the Timekeepers stepped forward, their outstretched hand offering something unexpected. "Join us," they said. "Take your place among the guardians of time. Your wisdom and bravery would be a gift to all who rely on its balance." The invitation hung in the air, shimmering with possibility. But Elara's mind drifted to her village, to the quiet life she'd left behind. She thought of her neighbors, her home, and the simple joys she'd always cherished. And then she thought of Kale, whose sacrifice had made all of this possible. With a gentle but firm shake of her head, Elara replied, "My place is not among the stars or the endless tides of time. My place is with my people, in the world I've always known. But I promise you this, I will carry the knowledge you've given me. I will protect the secrets of time, and I will honor Kale's memory in everything I do." The Timekeepers nodded, their expressions a mixture of respect and understanding. They knew her heart belonged to the earth, not to the infinite expanse they called home. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Elara felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had emerged from this journey, changed not just with the knowledge of time's delicate balance, but with a deeper understanding of herself. She turned toward the path that led back to her village, her steps steady and sure. The Timekeepers watched her go, their forms fading into the morning mist, leaving her with one final whisper: "Time will always remember you, Elara." And with that, she walked forward, ready to embrace the life she had chosen. A life shaped by courage, wisdom, and the quiet strength of a guardian in her own right. As the first light of dawn painted the sky in soft hues of gold and amber, Elara stepped onto the familiar path, leading back to her village. The air carried a gentle stillness, as if the world itself had exhaled in relief. Time, once erratic and unpredictable, now flowed with a serene rhythm, like a quiet stream meandering through the countryside. The villagers, too, moved with a calm assurance, their lives once again anchored in the steady passage of days and nights. In the heart of the village, Elara found solace in her small, candle-lit study. With a quill in hand and a blank page before her, she began to recount the extraordinary tale of the Timekeepers. Each stroke of ink seemed to breathe life into the memories, the labyrinth of ancient halls, the whispers of forgotten wisdom, and the weight of the responsibility she had carried. This new tome, bound in leather and etched with symbols of eternity, would serve as a bridge between the past and the future, ensuring that the story of the Timekeepers would never fade into obscurity. As the final words took shape on the page, Elara paused, her gaze drifting to the horizon. The sky stretched endlessly, a canvas of possibility, and a faint smile touched her lips. She had not only protected the delicate balance of time, but had also discovered a deeper truth about her own place in the grand tapestry of existence. There was a quiet fulfillment in knowing that her journey, though marked by challenges, had woven itself into the fabric of history. The village hummed with life around her, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Elara allowed herself to simply be. The weight of her quest had lifted, replaced by a gentle sense of peace. Yet, even as she embraced this moment of tranquility, she couldn't help but wonder what new stories the future might hold. For now, though, she was content to let the world unfold at its own pace, one serene day at a time. Elara's path has been nothing short of extraordinary. What began as a quiet existence among dusty tomes and forgotten stories has blossomed into a life of profound purpose. Her days as a curious librarian now feel like a distant echo, replaced by her role as a steadfast guardian of time's most sacred secrets. She's faced trials that would have shattered a lesser soul, yet each challenge has only deepened her resolve and sharpened her wisdom. The whispers of time, those ethereal voices that first drew her into this enigmatic world, remain her constant companions. They remind her that every fleeting second holds infinite potential, a treasure to be nurtured and safeguarded. Though the road ahead is uncertain, Elara steps forward with unshakable courage, her heart alight with the knowledge that she is part of something far greater than herself. The mysteries of time are vast and ever unfolding, but she walks this path with a quiet confidence, ready to protect what must be preserved and to honor the boundless gift of every moment.